I'm going to give you just a really brief rundown of the research I did last year. Some of you may know me. I focus mostly on the weird stuff. 2025 was a year of challenges for my program, but we still managed to get some research done. We continued looking at our hydromulch research, which is a biodegradable, sprayable mulch for use in horticultural systems. We did 2 studies related to that area. We evaluated onion growth in plots that had received 2 years of hydromulch additions to the soil to see if it would affect the onion growth. And we also started a new trial evaluating hydromulch with an underlayment of burlap in a gooseberry production system, and that would be relevant to almost any perennial fruit bush system. And then on a completely different note, we were also evaluating herbicide injury and weed control in Lewis flax, which is perennial flax, and that's an alternative to annual flax that we've been playing around with a little bit. So this is the onion study that followed the hydromulch treatments. 2 years of hydromulch was added to the soil. We just wanted to see, we are doing a bunch of formal soil health analyses, but I wanted to do something directly to assess crop response. And as you can see from this graphic, the top is plastic mulch that had been in plastic mulch for those 2 years. That's a standard control treatment. And then these other treatments are the type of tackifier that was in the hydromulch. It's basically shredded paper mixed with a gluey substance. And so the gargum at 6%, 3%, camelina at 6 and 3, those are different tackifiers or gluey substances. And it's pretty easy to see that these treatments did not have any impact on our onion yield, and we had a nice onion crop, a lot of which we sent over to the food bank. So that was nice. In the hydromulch plus burlap and gooseberry, we planted some gooseberry plants early in May, and then we laid the plastic mulch, plastic woven landscape mat, and then burlap on top of those bare root gooseberry plants. And then we applied some hydromulch treatments. We wanted to use a commercial hydromulch product, comes from a company named Profile, to see if it would be a good replacement for our DIY system, which is just shredded recycled paper. And so we had some Profile treatments. We had 3% Profile proprietary tackifier added. We had the Profile with gargum at 3% and then 6%. And then we had our DIY with 6% gargum. And then let's see what happened. This is what it looks like after we applied the hydromulch to the underlayment of burlap. You can see those blue spots. It's the Profile product. It has a dye in it. It's blue when you first apply it, but then later on when it dries, you really can't tell. The thing that was really evident right away is that the Profile product was loaded with little hard bits of paperboard and plastic, which we're trying to get away from. It's, it sort of looked like shredded garbage. And it turned out really rough, the surface of it. And then our DIY approach was a lot smoother and more coherent and didn't have the little hard bits of plastic and paperboard in it. And then we did measure the weed response in July, so mid-season, and then later on when we did our weeds measurements. These were whole plot, but the plots were small, so we just took them all and we did density and biomass, but here I'm mostly concerned with the density because that represents an event of a weed getting through the mulch, or sometimes I think the seeds are blowing in on top of the mulch and germinating from there. And what you can see in this first slide, we've got our DIY, which is right below the plastic woven mat, that performed as well as the landscape mat. And then all the commercial treatments were statistically the same, and they performed less well than either the plastic or the DIY. And we believe, again, that's due to the fact that the product was a little less cohesive than our formula. Then later on in the season, we've got our DIY formula with the B. It was a little less efficient at preventing weed emergence later on in the season compared to the plastic landscape mat, but it did better still than the commercial preparations by far. And at this point in the season, even the DIY was starting to degrade just a little bit. And next year, we're going to follow this up and try doing a reapplication of these hydromulches on top of our base. And so that's the plan for the future. And here's just some other stuff about our future plans. Measuring soil impacts is a big one. This is part of a large funded project, which is ending this year, funded by the OREI. That's the USDA's main organic program. And so we're going to finish that out. We're looking for new funding. And we're also working a little bit with industry. We have worked a little bit with Naturite Farms in California to look at some of these methods. And then finally, we were looking at Lewis flax weed control with herbicides. And I've been working with this for a few years. We've been doing some field and greenhouse studies, mostly to get a handle on what kinds of products the flax can tolerate. And this was our first season of a more thorough assessment in the field. We planted flax in March, our winter was very conducive for this research. We had a number of different treatments. We had an untreated check and an untreated hand-weeded check. And then we had these herbicide treatments with some pre's and some posts, a dual 2 magnum as a pre. These were chosen on the basis of greenhouse studies where we evaluated herbicide injury on the flax. And then we've got a couple of growth regulators, Stinger, MCP ester, and then Cadet with the dual magnum or without. And then we were looking at, there wasn't any herbicide injury really on the flax that was noticeable. So all these were reasonably safe for the flax. All the treatments also had some accent for improved grass control, so bear that in mind. And then these are some slides showing our weed density and weed biomass measured later on in the season and probably July. And what you can see here is that compared to the untreated, weed density was statistically the same, although there's a lot of variability. You can see that in the standard errors associated with those means. And some of them, you can see that the MCPA treatments verged on being statistically different from the other treatments. But then when you look at biomass, you can see that the MCPA with dual treatment was statistically better than the untreated. And the reason for the difference between the density and the biomass is really that MCPA, the major weed species was lamb's quarters. And it was just a carpet of lamb's quarters. And the MCPA, we got it on a little late. That's another problem. And it really stunted the lamb's quarters, and they were curled over and pretty much dead, but they were still there. So we counted them. But it really affected the biomass of those lamb's quarters because they weren't growing that great by then. And so we'll probably continue on with this and look at what happens in the second year and try some of these better options for second year applications. And so just to wrap it up, we'll be testing these options. I think that the dual 2 magnum was safe. It wasn't really that effective. I mean, we know all these herbicides control weeds, but what we need to do is figure out a range of herbicides that are safe for flax so you can pick the ones that'll work for the weeds in your field. It just so happened that the ones we picked weren't that great on the weeds in our field, which were primarily lamb's quarters, but there's also some Canada thistle and wild buckwheat. So we're going to be continuing on in 2026 to test some of those options. And think that's all. If you're interested about the hydromulch thing, I've got a video up on YouTube about that. And is there time for questions? Okay. Anyone have any questions? Yeah. If you want to know a lot more about that, that's why I posted this video. It's such a short talk, I can't get in every detail, but in short, it's just shredded recycled paper mixed with water and a little bit of this gluey substance. And we use a commercially available hydro seeding machine. It's basically just a big holding tank with a powerful pump that allows the material to be sprayed out onto the field. And if you want to see what that looks like, you can take a gander at that QR code link. Anyone else? The reason why we were adding this woven underlayment is that all of our previous research was in annual systems. And so the mulch we would want it to be starting to degrade by the end of the season in an annual system. But I've gotten a lot of comments from producers of perennial crops wanting to know how long it lasted. And so we were trying to find a way to make it last longer. And it lasts longer with this underlayment. And then the next year you'd go in and sort of reapply the hydromulch on top of it, because it does degrade a little bit over the season. It kind of depends on the rain. We had a lot of powerful driving rainstorms last summer, if you'll recall, and that did cause some degradation of the mulch.